All right, guys. Someone that speaks to this every day and a couple times during the day is none other than the managing editor and co-publisher of Politicus USA. I've been following this woman and her partner, Jason Easley, for a while. And I can't tell you how many times I have printed out material and articles that they have written, and I've referenced none other than Sarah Jones, who's with us this morning. Sarah, good morning and welcome to Choose Views, and thank you for holding.
Thank you so much for having me on, and I'm really excited to be on your show. And I also just wanted to say that your caller was right on. Pam is right on. Pam, you are spot on about what's going on right now, and Democrats need to acknowledge that.
Yeah, I see. This is the blessing of timing. Every now and again, you get lucky and things time out your way. But I knew that you would appreciate what Pam was saying, so I wanted to have her wrap up what she was saying. She was on before we took our break at 7 o'clock, and I didn't want to. You know how this works. You got to hit the commercials. You got to do the things you got to do. And I thought maybe it'll be right to have her on or finish her thoughts right before Sarah comes on. Because Lord knows where you stand on this stuff, and your writings have just Sarah, when I talk about threading the needle, or when the phrase is used of threading the needle or hitting the bullseye, I'm going to say this right now. You all need to follow Sarah Jones, Politicus USA. What she and Jason write each day, multiple times during the day, is amazing. And I so appreciate the work that you do, and I so appreciate you being a part of today's show, because we definitely have to have you back, because you strike the chord every single day. And so that being said, Sarah Jones, tell us who you are. Tell our audience who you are and a little bit about your background and how you gotten to this point of what you're doing as managing editor.
I have been covering politics now for 15 years. I started right as Barack Obama started his first term. I was very honored to be able to cover his White House and be, credentialed to do that, and was really excited for obvious reasons, I think, because he just brought so much intellectualism and adherence to a lot of our values. So that was a great time in the country as far as I was concerned. And before that, I worked in film, and it was weird. I was still working in film, and I was listening every day to what was going on in politics. And I had been involved in politics my whole life, but not as a journalist. And I was just so angry every day listening to Republicans, mostly Republicans, not to say Democrats don't, skirt the line and mislead people sometimes, but it was predominantly Republicans, because I think that at that time, they were, I don't remember what their issue was, but there's always some culture war issue that they're kind of lying about, on TV, and they just get away with this stuff. And I thought, why is no one calling this out? And I had a background where I knew that a lot of times advertisers have power over what people can cover in the media,
right?
And now it's like think tanks, and there's so much involved. There's so much money involved now, and of course, corporate media has grown to be too big to fail at this point. And, and so I just wanted to talk to people and talk about things that matter to people and speak up for people. I felt like nobody was out there speaking for the people. And I think there's plenty of people who are doing that. So I'm not trying to, say no one else is doing it. But there wasn't a loud voice out there. And so I joined Politicus. Jason had started it already, I think like 6 months to a year before I joined. And then we were so lucky during, I don't think you could do this in today's environment, but it just grew organically into this huge operation. And at one point, all on its own with no corporate money, we've never taken corporate money and never will. It grew to I don't remember, it was one of the top websites in the world. So we just got really lucky with that, and we were able to speak for the people, and with facts, always with facts, because that's there's so many things to take into account when you're covering all this. We want to keep people focused on what's actually happened and not fearmonger people. That's the other direction I see too many people on the left going, in my opinion. And what I am so concerned about with that is that we don't want people disengaging.
Right.
You know, we want people to be out there, right? And so when they get scared, they don't vote, they disengage. And it's like, yes, and, you know, of course, I'm talking about before times. Right now, I do want to acknowledge for everybody, because I think everyone's being gaslit. You have every right to be afraid. You have every right to be angry. Those are natural reactions. If you don't feel those things, you're not paying attention. So those are good things. But we also need to find that place inside of ourselves where we can be the brave person standing up for our neighbor and for people who are more vulnerable than we are. That's a position that is important for us all to take, I think, at this point. So.
Well, first of all, thank you for that delivery, because folks needed to understand the history, but also why you've written and covered things the way in which you do, because there isn't a clear voice and that's why your material, your articles are so attractive to me, because, you know, I'll just read you guys some headlines. You should just pay attention to this. House Republican disaster. As Representative Scott Perry hides constituents demand AOC. Did you guys hear me talk about that last week? That comes from my gal Sarah and my guy Jason. People take to the streets to save the post office from Doge. That's a Sarah piece. Republicans in big trouble as deep red Nebraska town haulers chant tax the rich. That's from Sarah and Jason. These guys are doing exactly what Sarah just said. And that's speaking to the things that so many Americans want to hear in an unfiltered, unapologetic way. And they do it in snippets, by the way. So yes, I'm kind of giving a little bit of promo to Sarah and Jason, but they deserve it because of the work that they do. And it's folks like Pam, listeners like Pam, and so many others. We had a gentleman on earlier, Andy, who talked about, okay, we've identified these issues, whether it be voter suppression, whether it be racism, sexism, and all these things mixed together. But what's the do? What's the fix? What's the answer? So I've got to ask you this question, and it's not one to put you on the spot. It's just to get how your brain is operating in this space. The vote from the Senate on the CR was definitely one where people came back to Senate Minority Leader Schumer and said, yo, dude, what the hell were you thinking? So I listened to his interview on The View, as I said earlier in today's show, and I understood his logic. I didn't fully agree with it, but I felt like the miss from Senator Schumer was, if that's where you were going to be, then you should have told us in advance, rather than letting it kind of fall out of the mouths of a few Democrats. And now you look like you're cleaning up the feces. And that is, I think, where a lot of people are right now, is that, Dem, stop doing that. I'm a big supporter. You know that. But stop doing that kind of stuff. Stop letting people think, oh, they're not really organized right now. Are you seeing that, hearing that, or am I crazy?
No, I'm so glad you said that, because every day I ask myself, am I crazy? I personally, and I want to be honest with people. I feel like journalism for so long, and what we see in the Beltway is so much removal of the journalist from the impact of the policies. And that's because most journalists are kind of elite, privileged white men. And so I've been trying to walk that line for a while, and I decided with this new with this person coming back into office, I feel like people are being gaslit so much. I want to say that absolutely people should be angry, and Democrats and Chuck Schumer specifically, what he did, in my opinion, was wrong. It was cowardly. And where this is coming from, right? This isn't coming out of the blue. We saw this over and over again. We saw this when the Democratic Party turned their back on Joe Biden, for example, because the consultancy class and because certain people at the New York Times and others were writing these conspiracy pieces about him. They turned their back on their own base. Their base had chosen him, right? To me, I was like, what is happening right now? Why are you letting the consultancy class and the donor class, and a lot of that came from the tech industry, because they didn't want the regulations that Joe Biden was putting into place. So you see all this power coming together, and they are driving the Democratic Party right now, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And I hate to say that, because it's nothing like what's happening with the Republican Party in terms of corruption, So I hate to criticize Democrats when they're sort of like the best option out there right now. On the other hand, they're not getting the message. And I think Chuck Schumer showed everyone that was his chance to have some leverage against what looks like to a lot of Americans, and I cannot say that it's not true, the theft from the government by Doge, Elon Musk getting people's private data, getting their health records, getting their medical health records. This is outrageous. It's unacceptable. It's un-American. And so to have Chuck Schumer say, and I understand his what he gave as the reason, and I think you laid out so well why he should have, if that was true, he should have said that in the first place. Yep. But I'm not sure that I actually believe that it is true, that he. That he was told. And I'm not. Right?
No, Sarah, listen, this is why I love your work, because, I'm biting myself not to catch up. But yes, exactly. Like, well, then if that were the case, then, dude, you should have come out from the jump and said.
And he would have, right? I think he would have if that was true. And that's the problem right there, because what I see happening is they don't understand where their base is.
Yep.
And they are all, let's remember, and for anyone that isn't aware, these people are all privileged. They are not being impacted the way you and I are and the way your audience is. And so for them, this is about beltway politics. How can I get reelected? How can I get a good, write-up by Politico? It is not about how can I be responsive to my constituents. And that is supposed to be the job. And that is the part where this all has gone off the rails, in my opinion, that this, all the influence of money in politics is really what has distanced all of those people from their constituents. And we see that at these town halls where Republicans are getting booed and yelled at, and now they're too afraid to even show up to hear from their constituents. And again, I know your audience knows this, but it blows my mind every day. That is your job. Last week was the week to be in your district. You're supposed to hear from the people in your district. That is what we pay you for.
Yep.
And what do? They're hiding.
That's why I said,
they
Sarah, no, that's why I said, and I've been saying for a number of weeks now, the Dems need to roll into all Republican districts, and they need to go and steal their candy and cookies, because it's fertile ground. And I'll be doggone if this is where I get frustrated with Schumer and Jeffries. And I've said this on the show a number of times. Y'all should be thinking strategically like that. Oh, the Republicans don't want to show up in their own districts? Let's send 5 of ours to their districts and go let the folks know in those districts. We got you. They messed up. They're stinky. Here's what we're going to do to make it better. And they won't. And it's just like, Sarah, you and I both get passionate about this, and I see it in your writings. But doggone it, if they did that and made it clear, we're coming for your stuff and we're going to your districts, people would go, oh, they're doing exactly what we as Republican voters want. And that's for you to show up as Democrats, because we'll vote for y'all, because some of your ideas do make more sense. And that's the frustration. And I know people hear it in my voice. I know they've heard it in your voice this morning and see it in your writings. And it's not that we don't like Democrats. For people out there, they're going, oh, there we go again. They're throwing. No, we're not. We're trying to get their attention so they do better. Yeah. You can be critical and complimentary at the same time.
Yeah, and that is part of our job as journalists. That's part of the job, even as constituents. Is if you can't criticize these people, then they're not going to be responsive to you. And I actually think, and I've been thinking about this so much, that is one place where the left. The left used to be, like, I would almost say overly critical, like they were of Obamacare, so that they don't give political cover to the people they elect, so they can pass more progressive policies. That's, got to give them political cover, got to have their back. And part of that cover is showing up for these protests. Part of that cover is making these phone calls every day to your representative to tell them what you want. So part of speaking up and criticizing them is giving them political cover to enact your will.
Bingo.
What you want to see from them. And I will say, like, what you were talking about, constituents are organizing these kind of counter town halls for Republicans when they're not showing up. There's one coming up in South Carolina in Nancy Mace's district.
I know,
of all
right?
things.
Woo,
Right?
I'd love to be there. Wouldn't you love
crazy.
to be there? Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, I would love to be there. And, and I lived in Georgia, and I'll just say for a second, like when I heard your caller talking about, and you mentioned it, one of the fights that I have had since I started writing with Democratic strategists, some of them, is they will tell me, like during the Obama years and afterwards, they would tell me, the criticism isn't racism. And I said, you know what? Not all criticism is racism, but racism is propelling and driving a lot of the base on the Republican side, deliberately being stoked by the elites. That is an age-old tactic. It's been around since there was power. They have found a way to divide us by whatever they can find. Now they're doing trans. They'll find their issue, and then they'll use that to drive a wedge between us, because that is how they distract us from, giving more tax cuts to the rich while the egg prices are soaring. This is a weapon that they use, and it's a real thing, and it's happening. And I know this because I've lived all around this country now, and I. Being a white woman, people say things to me that they wouldn't say to me, I would hope, if I wasn't. And they're really sometimes disturbing, And so I hear, and I get mistaken as a Republican, quite often, just on appearances.
Right.
And so people would say things to me, and so I really understand how much that does drive what's going on. And it always bothered me that that the strategists want to pretend that's not happening, and they want to put like a fancy label on it. And a lot of that comes from, and one of them actually said to me, "Oh, you know what? You just don't understand because you live in a big blue city." I said, "Actually, right now I live in a Trump-dominated small town America." Yeah. I am surrounded by Trump supporters. I know exactly what they're thinking. They tell me every day. And you are wrong. You're the one that lives, like the strategist that lives in a blue city, and you therefore feel some kind of safety. You're in your like academic elite tower kind of making strategy for the Democratic Party based on that experience, and you're not understanding what people are experiencing all around this country, and people who, people of color, people of vulnerable status in any category that you pick are experiencing by these Trump supporters. And I'm not denigrating all Trump supporters, but there is an ugly aspect to this movement, and we've seen it over and over again. It's violent and it's ugly, and just to have Democrats.
It's not something. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. And it's not going to move us forward as much as people want to think, right? Because it's all about regressive. Not even politics. It's about a regressive society. It's about, and I talked about this all the time. But it's about taking us back to a time when straight white quote Christian men with some nationalistic beliefs run everything. And, if we don't say that out loud, we'll never get to fixing it. It's about having women barefoot and pregnant, to be literal. It's about having post-enslavement, Jim Crow, and after World War II isms throughout the country. It just is. And that's where I think sometimes we have to cut through the filter. And listen, Vice President Harris did her best in that space. But I think a lot of what you said earlier about the technocrat and the what did you call them? The data elite and the consultants. Thank you. The consultant elite. Yeah. They keep getting it wrong because what they're putting into their mix to come up with a cake are the wrong ingredients. They're putting the wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, or your observation. They're putting the wrong stuff in to come up with the analysis to get to a point where they can actually consult in this current climate. No? Absolutely. And because they're coming from a place of privilege. Like, again, that is not where most Americans are coming from. And the Democratic Party is supposed to be the party
And they did plenty of policies. They have been great on policy for working people, and I want to be very clear about that. I think Nancy Pelosi ushered through really incredible policy. So did Joe Biden, former President Joe Biden. They've been great on policy. But then there becomes this disconnect with how they respond and what they fight for in terms of these other issues. And that's where I agree with you 100%. And you know what I wanted to share with you, because you kind of touched on this, and it's something that I see happening that I'm kind of excited about, actually. So maybe a good thing to pop in there before you have to. One of the things you talked about, that all these regressive policies, and for years they've been fighting for all of this, right? The Republican Party. But this is the first time in my lifetime people are actually seeing the result of those policies. And it happened when they overturned Roe, and now it's happening with the Department of Education, and it's happening with USAID. It's happening with all these things that they are destroying, and Social Security, Medicaid. And people, it's so easy to fight against a policy and a right when it's already established. Mm-hmm. When you start to take those things away, all of those arguments, the reasons why they weren't good arguments become very clear. People are experiencing them firsthand. So now Republicans are going to have to start facing
the results of those bad policies.
Yes.
And the results of the things that they said they believed in, or that they thought they were advocates for, how destructive they are to the person that's right next to you. It could be your spouse, it could be grandma, grandpa, niece, nephew, and the list goes on. Right there, immediately connected to you. Not some far off person 3 states away, but right there. And that to me is the fertile ground that the Democratic Party, the Democratic leadership, they have to do what Governor Pritzker's doing, I believe, here in Illinois. He's taken the fight on. He is leaned in hard to say, no, not on my watch, and here's what we're going to do about it. And I would hope, I'm praying that the leadership on the national level takes a little bit of sauce from Governor Pritzker in that space. Sarah, you can hear the music, which means I have to shut up and you and I have to wrap up. But you are going to be back because I love your work, yours and Jason's. It's phenomenal.
Oh, thank you so much.
And I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us. Sarah Jones, y'all, managing director and co-publisher of Politicus USA, the daily Politicus USA. Check her out. We'll have you back, Sarah. Have a great day. We appreciate you being with us.
Thank you so much, Richard.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.